Hello
Hello everyone,
everyone, I'm Kyla,
I'm Jerwin.
and today we're going to discuss about the
N-
language of women lacking,
Lacking,
powerless,
powerless,
and
different.
different.
Now, it has been said that the language of women is lacking. How true is it? So, basically, we'll be digging up into the deficit approach.
So according to Jesperson's controversial piece, the deficiency of women's speech can be found in their use of
Hyperbole,
incoherent sentences,
inferior command of syntax,
less extensive vocabulary,
and non innovative approach to language. Lack of fundamentally claims about women's language is lacking, weak, trivial, and hesitant. In short, deficient when compared to men's language. Lack of claim that this weakness can be seen in certain features that are typical of women's speech. For example, the use of
empty vocabulary, the choice of adjectives such as lovely and adorable, and colors such as beige and lavender.
also the use of weaker expletives, example, oh dear, as opposed to stronger expletives, because these expletives usually men do not use it. They also use very trivial subject matter, tendency to be very polite or over polite, where men would be direct. So all of these stuffs below marks weakness in the language of women, according to Lakov. But it is not really reliable. I mean, true, because later on we'll be talking about what are the counterclaims against it.
So Lakoff also asserted that women use intonational patterns that indicate uncertainty and seek their interlocutor's approval.
Okay, so Robin Lakov said that the women's use of intonational patterns marks uncertainty. Nga naman kaha, and they seek their interlocutor's approval. Other features which are seen to indicate such insecurity on the part of female speakers are tag questions and the use of more intensifiers and qualifiers. For example, tag questions like, it is a lovely day, isn't it? Or intensifiers and qualifiers like, so, really, well, a bit than male speakers. Because usually it is used by women. They use so much, so really, it is so beautiful, it is so amazing, it's so pretty, it's so nice, whatever. But in men's language, they don't really use so. They're very direct.
Because is very expressive in terms of using their language.
Yeah, because they are emotional.
Indeed.
And men are grammatical. Women's speech seem in general to contain more instances of well, kind, and so forth, words that convey the sense that the speaker is uncertain about what he or she is saying, or cannot vouch for the accuracy of the statement. These words appear as an apology for making an assertion at all. So, according to Robin Lakoff, all of these um, qualifiers and intensifiers marks uncertainty.
Indeed.
Is it really true? Later on, we'll get into the other side of the story, if that was really true.
So, according to Lakoff, is assuming that the woman's heavily qualified statements and the use of tag questions are sign of their uncertainty and efforts not to force their own subordinate view of their interlocutor.
But the question now is women's language
Language
really
really
deficient
deficient
or
or
lacking?
lacking?
So the answer is a big no.
No.
Why? Because tag questions and qualifiers, also known as hedges, performs different communicative functions. So naadi siya function ang tag questions and qualifiers. It
Indeed.
is not a sign of unsa to, uncertainties, hesitancy, and whatsoever. The use of hedges have a different function, namely to include the other speaker and to keep the conversation flowing, according to Coates and Fishman. So there is a very important role of hedges in the conversation. They keep the conversation flowing.
Flowing. So, the use of any form depends on many variables. So, apart from gender, such as participant status and relative power, there are objectives such the rule in interaction and type of activity, and
And
the
the
overall
overall
context.
context. Okay. Lakoff's work has been criticized, however, because it has a lack of empirical data. That is, for a reliance on her own intuition and casual observation. And for her, and for her use of cultural stereotypes also as a way of studying gendered language.
Language.
So na-consider siya as very stereotyping. Okay? And there is no
Yes.
empirical data accordingly. So there has been so many criticism on her account.
So tag questions, hedges, minimal responses like yeah, right can function not a sign of hesitancy, but a conversational facilitation strategies.
Okay, so truth be told, tag questions, hedges, minimal responses can actually function as a facilitation strategy. So that is not a sign of uncertainty. However, we need to know that we still need to ask questions about who is doing the facilitating, in what ways, and in what situations and settings. Is the said facilitation a norm of speakers? Basin tungod kay it's a norm so magamit gid ang babae og tag questions, hedges and minimal responses. Maybe because it's a norm, or maybe it's a burden shouldered by subordinate speakers, or maybe it is a strategy to control the interaction, or a combination of this at different times and in different settings. So depende ang pag-understand what is this facilitation or what is this kind of strategy. So that's why we need to know that.
So despite presenting a deficit of view of women's language, lack of language in women's place is an important work written from a feminist perspective because it explains the inadequacies of women's language in political and cultural terms rather than seeing them as natural sex difference.
Okay, so even though Robin Lakoff have shortcomings in her account on the language and gender study, but she is still acknowledged because without her, there would be no, more researchers instigated in this field. Okay, so she is still a very important, very helpful proponent in the study of feminist linguistics. Okay, let's move on to
The
powerless.
powerless.
Is the language of women really powerless? So we'll answer that later on. So we are on the dominance approach. Okay, so back in the day, the political climate is very patriarchal. So when we say patriarchal, so it's the notion of men. So men as the notion. So the language of men here in this time is the norm. And according to Lakoff, the women's language is lacking. However, according to Dale Spender, she argued that rather than the women's deficiency, what is at stake is the deficiency of social order. Ano siya nga, kung naamang gali deficient diri nga side, it's not the language of women, but it is the social position of women nga deficient. Why? Because they are on the bottom part of the society. They were not given importance at that time. So the question now is
Is
women's
women's
language
language
really
really powerless?
powerless? So the answer is no.
No.
Why? Because the function of tag questions and hedges was interactional and facilitative, rather than a sign of women's insecurity
Insecurity
and
and
hesitancy.
hesitancy.
So it doesn't mean that they use tag questions and hedges, they are insecure and hesitant in their speech. No. But it has an interactional and facilitative function.
And women appeared to be using them in order to include their interlocutor in the conversation and in order to keep the conversational flowing by getting the attention of the unresponsive male.
So you can see there the importance of the use of tag questions and hedges. It keeps the conversation flowing.
Flowing.
Questions and hedges do conversational work by trying to get a response from the other speaker. Indeed.
Women are skilled communicators facilitating interpersonal relationships. They are the ones providing conversational support and keeping the conversational going.
Okay. So women may be in inferior in terms of social position, but they are not inferior in terms of social training or inherent abilities. Because, of course, truth be told, they are, if we look at their social position, yes, obviously they are subordinate, they're inferior, but it doesn't mean that their language is lacking. They still have inherent abilities, they still have inherent, social training. Men do not provide the necessary attentiveness responses during conversation that marks an equal power relations. According to Fishman, male speakers assert asymmetrical right to control and develop topics of conversation, and that they do so without evidence repercussions. So, accordingly, men do not pay so much attention, especially pag magstorya sila sa mga babae. Why? Because they think that they are powerful. Because they think that women are subordinate lang. So they do not give importance to
Women.
women. They do not pay attention so much for them. So according to Zimmerman and West, interruptions is a form of dominance, because men also are said to be very interrupters in the conversation. They keep on interrupting. So they said that interruptions is a form of dominance.
Men do not only interrupt women but also use delayed minimal responses more often, and that these responses were longer delayed when talking to women. That was according to Coates.
Okay, so you can see here that delayed na gani ang response, minimal pa kayo. So
Yep.
we can then infer that maybe because they do not really value answering women's in the conversation. Okay?
Male dominance is perpetuated through the use of the following features: questions,
Interruptions,
interruptions,
qualifiers,
qualifiers,
back
back
channeling,
channeling,
and
and
topic
topic
control.
control.
So these are the features of male dominance. Okay, the last one is on the different. So this is on the difference approach.
In contrast to a view of women as weak, deficient, and as a victim's dominance, there is an attempt to see women's language not just as different, but as positively valued.
Okay, so in this approach, it is a positive perspective on the women's language already, as opposed to the first two, the deficit and the dominance.
Yep.
Such re-evaluation of women's language is based on a theorization of differences as a result of participation in different male and female subcultures. The only thing that we need to remember here in the difference approach is the term subcultures.
Indeed.
Why? Because according to Maltzenborker 1988,
It is the differences in the cultures of boys and girls rather than in the power, status, or inherent male and female communication.
okay, so according to Maltzenborker, the differences of male-female communication is brought by their culture. Different conversational patterns originated in childhood between ages of 5 and 15, when boys and girls learn to use language differently through interacting primarily on single-sex peer groups. That is very common. Katong mga bata pa ta,
Yes.
kung babae ka, babae po di mo makadula. Kung lalaki ka,
Lalaki po
lalaki
di
po
mo
di mo
kadula.
makadula. And that creates a subculture, the notion of their subculture that they have to act like this because they're girls, they have to be like this, they have to be like that, and all this and all that. And also same goes with the boys, nga, they have to be straightforward, masculine, whatsoever. This creates culture, and you know what, this culture expands to their use of language. Maltz and Burker said that gender is only one of many cultural influences
On
on
language
language use.
use. So, Coates discuss the diverse ways in which women and men are socialized into different gender rules,
This may happen through adults providing
providing
different
different linguistic
linguistics models
models for
for children,
children,
talking to children differently according to their sex, having
having
different
different
preconceptions of boys and
boys and
girls,
girls,
and responding differently to a linguistic strategy used similarly by boys
and
and girls.
girls.
So, how they are nurtured also matters on their language use. No, depende po siya sa parents, yun sa nila pag amuma ang bata
It has an impact.
on their linguistic use. I mean, linguistic performance. Cultural differences, such as the pressure on girls to be nice and polite and on boys to be strong and competitive,
are
are
likely
likely
to
to lead
lead
to
to
the
the
learning
learning
of
of
different
different interaction
interactional
styles
styles and
and
the
the
adoption
adoption of
of
different
different linguistic
linguistic choices
choices
by
by
girls
girls and
and by
boys.
boys.
So cultural difference really matters in the language use. That is the reason why they consider the language of men and women as really different. But on the good perspective, that take it or leave it, different good ang babae ug lalaki nga language.
Indeed.
Because of cultural differences that you're exposed to during their childhood or the social linguistic environment.
So, differences was based on the different socialization of acculturation of boys and of girls. The idea that girls and boys grow up being socialized so differently and with different conversational expectations that communication between them is like a communication between two different cultures already. That was according to Tannen.
Okay, so according to Talent, it's like the girls and boys communication, it's not just a communication between two languages. It is technically, I mean, it's like a communication between two cultures. So since culture, when we're talking about culture, it is not, there is no guarantee that they are the same. There is always differences. So
Difference.
that's the reason why there is also difference in the use of language. So that's the notion of difference approach. Okay, so that's it, guys. Thank you so much for listening. We hope that you've got something in this presentation on the language of women. Now, take note that the language of women is not really lacking. It's not also inferior or subordinate, and it's just different. Though it's different, but it doesn't mean that it's lacking and powerless. Thank you so much, guys, for spending your time watching this video. I hope that you will be safe all the time, even if we are have this pandemic. God bless you all, and
Thank you.